Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
This week at Safeway, shop the 10 for $10 produce sale. With the 10 for $10 produce sale, get items like large avocados, mangoes, green, red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, cucumbers, large lemons, or 16-ounce bags of Signature Farms baby-peeled carrots for the member price of just $1 each. Plus, select meats like Signature Farms 80% lean ground beef and Signature Select extra meaty pork loin back ribs are buy one, get one free this week. Hurry in before these deals are gone. Visit Safeway.com for more deals.
Hello, Nest family. We've had a couple of weeks off maybe as we let the dust settle from the Eagles campaign, but we all enjoyed the final series, of course, and seeing the state of our grand team looking grand as ever for the grand final, which was wonderful, Drewy Jones, as I bring you in to watch Optus Stadium and the wonderful state of Western Australia in all of its glory.
Yeah, hey, Garby. I was pretty jealous watching Optus Stadium fill out. And just enjoy the buzz of grand final week. We were missing it here in Victoria, that's for sure, but happy for everyone in Perth who got the opportunity to go and to watch. It's funny how these things eventuate, isn't it? I think about 14 or 15 months ago, I called, is it Christina Matthews or Christina Keneally? Who's the head of cricket in WA? I spoke. Yeah, Christina Matthews I spoke to, and I said, is there any way you'd be able to juggle the schedule to allow a grand final to happen at Optus Stadium? And I was talking about last season because of the way that the grounds are handed over to cricket season, and because the grand final was later. You know, we were talking about it, well, I was talking about it with her sort of off the record, you know, all that time ago to see whether cricket would sort of play ball. As it turned out, obviously it didn't eventuate, it went to the Gabba, but in the end, we weren't that far away from a WA grand final. So hopefully it's not the first and last that we see, but a terrific occasion, and good to see Melbourne break their 57-year drought.
Yeah, I was just proud of WA. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening now who managed to go, and it was just great seeing a state that, you know, we get mocked from time to time, and you know, we sit here on the East Coast, but we're still Perth boys, and we always will be. And we get mocked from time to time, and maybe you grow up in Perth or WA with a little bit of a chip on your shoulder and a little bit of an inferiority complex, if you like. And I think, you know, that was all shown up in a wonderful way. And it was just a world-class production lead up to it. And then performance by everyone involved with the theatrics around the game on the night. It was fantastic. I think it just sent everyone a message. You know, you can make it jokes, and most of it is that. But pipe down a little bit, because WA and Perth can turn it on as well as anyone.
Well, it was nice to have somewhat positive discussion around WA because of the border situation. I feel as though there's been a lot of negative stuff that's been, negative connotations associated with WA in recent times, particularly from an Eastern States point of view. So, yeah, it was nice to be talking about WA in a more positive light. Unfortunately, our favourite son, Basil Zemplis, was probably worst on ground. That was the only slip up of the entire grand final week. Was him just throwing out the run sheet, and just, you know, it was the Basil show post game.
People just like to smash him, but he did make a blue. Let's not deny that. Is WA's Eddie Maguire. Like Eddie, this happened to Eddie when he became too big for his boots. He started making little mistakes because he's just so many balls to juggle at once. I think that's Basil's predicament, unfortunately, at the moment. He's just become too big. Yeah,
well, you take that aside, and I think the whole thing went really well. So it was great to see Optus Stadium certainly on the national stage, and, you know, arguably world stage, I suppose, but fantastic game. And that leads us to today, because trade period is not far away, Garby, and I guess, you know, it's always crucial, but it feels like ahead of, you know, a bounce back season, something needs to be done.
I feel a little bit guilty at the moment, Drewy, because over the last few years, I would laugh at people who would obsess about trade week and the draft in the midst of finals and just after finals. Like when we've played in a granny, we've been leading into a final series and there's a week off and people are talking about trades and all this stuff. And I'd be like, how pathetic are you? You should be talking about finals footy and your team playing finals like we are. But there was a little bit of me that went the other way, unfortunately, over the last week or two, where I am looking at trades and I am looking at our draft order and looking at the prospects and phantom drafts and who we're going to get. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. But yeah, there was a little bit of guilt that I was doing something that I bagged in the past, but that's the way it goes in this game.
Yeah. So if we sum up where we're at the moment, we've got 35 players left on our list. So if we concede that Jarrod Brander is gone, so Archie, Vardy, Brander, Jarrod Cameron, Collins, Ainsworth, Hutchings, Johnson and Venables, that cuts the list to 35. And our picks coming up in the draft are 10, 29, 35, 49 and 65. So the draft hand is okay. It's not outstanding, but there is plenty of room on the list to move things around. And I guess that the news from a West Coast point of view over the last couple of weeks in this regard has been Sam Petrevski-Seton from Carlton nominating West Coast as a preferred destination for him coming back to WA. So what were your initial reactions when it came to SPS?
Good question. Mildly excited. Like not over enthusiastic about it. 94 games, number 6 draft pick, cool. He's still got a lot of footy ahead of him. Do we need some pace in the team? Yes. Do we need some more creativity in the team? Yes. Can he bolster up the midfield a touch? Yes. But the worries on him are, the ability to gut run and work hard the other way and push himself. That was our main issue this year. So I think there are positives there, and I'd be happy to bring him in, and I don't think we will. I wouldn't want the club to give up too much. I really wouldn't. And I don't think that will be the case for both clubs. And we'll get onto Brander in a moment. And I'm furious in a sense about the way in which it's been handled around him. But yeah, Petrevski-Seton, I think he can play that role where we've given a few players a chance in recent years in the absence of Willie Rioli, who we've really missed, which is a half forward who slots into the midfield and gives us some class in there. And we tried Jermaine Jones a bit, didn't really work out. We tried Brendan Archie, hasn't really worked out, although I think Jones will have some more time to prove himself in that regard. Zach Langdon, not sure if he's really got the ability to play midfield. He's more half forward. There's a chance he can slot in and play that role where he drifts forward and he also comes in the midfield and gives us a bit of class. But I hope we don't give up too much for him. How about you, mate?
Yeah, so Adam Simpson flagged this on radio last week, didn't he? He said, we think he's midfield / half forward, which obviously is not the position he was playing at Carlton. But it really fell apart for him at the Blues, didn't it? I mean, he made his debut after he was drafted, as an 18-year-old out of WA, as an inside midfielder against Richmond in front of 90,000 fans at the MCG. So when they first brought him to the club, they used him in what his preferred role was, and he obviously grew up coming through underage football, playing as a midfielder. So I wrote a trade piece on the Patreon a couple of weeks ago, and I said, Samo's career has ground to a halt at Carlton, which presents an opportunity to pick him up cheaply. The question is, where does he best fit? It's been so long since we've seen him as an inside mid, which is where he first broke into the Carlton side. He was never prolific in that role, but has good skills and seems tough enough. He was marooned at half-back for the latter part of his Blues career before eventually being out of the side altogether. And then I finished by saying, if he's available, he might be worth the risk. Given a change of scenery and some job security, he might flourish. So I think he would fit into our best 22, and maybe he might be able to extract a bit more out of himself than what we saw at Carlton. Yeah. He's an upgrade on Zach Langdon, if that's the role that you're thinking that he might play. Yeah. But he's not quite the same player as Langdon. So Langdon's a more of a forward, tiny bit mid, but there's been opportunities, as you said, there is a role there that spends time at half forward and then gets midfield minutes. So yeah, I think for the right price, he's a pretty good addition. If we're trying to bounce back and compete for a flag, or at least to play in finals, then adding someone in there, he's 23, 24, that makes sense.
The main positive is he's got some zip. I use that word a lot, but that is something we lack. Without Luke Shuey playing regularly, without Elliot Yeo playing every game, and with Tim Kelly copping injuries, we just seem to lack just that bit of burst in midfield and a little bit of class, someone who can just break the game open. He's got the ability to do that. That's the exciting part, even if he's not a full-time midfielder. And maybe he chose the Eagles. I don't know the reasons why, but maybe he feels there's more of an opportunity there than, say, the Dockers, who are pretty well stacked, even in the absence of Adam Chera, with a young midfield group to get in there and play some minutes and help out in an area of the ground where the Eagles have clearly had deficiencies this season. So he can definitely a lot in that area, but we've already heard Stephen Silvani say on Melbourne radio, he hasn't quite put in the work ethic. He needs to get on top of that, or else it could just accentuate the problem that we had this season, where you get rolled over too easily when the going gets tough. So I hope they identify that and address it. And, everyone matures later. Maybe he'll come back to Perth and he'll realise that this is his chance to really knuckle down, and Adam Simpson will get the best out of him.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot to lose here unless we are forced to give up a high draft pick. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I think his race has been run at Carlton. The only thing that could change that is that if Michael Voss comes in and views him as a required player, and then that might drive his price up a little bit more. But in the same way that we haven't protected Jarrod Brander's value, like they've trashed Petrevski-Seton's value. They've played him out of position. They've used him as sub a bunch of times. They've dropped him like 4 or 5 times in the season. Like, you can't sit there in a meeting discussing a trade for Sam Petrevski-Seton and Carlton act like he's some high-prized draft pick who they've developed and matured. Like, you haven't. You've played him out of position. You've dropped him. So ultimately, I don't think their bargaining position is going to be that strong.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. And yeah, that is the angle on him. He hasn't been played in his preferred role. He hasn't been played in the position that he was drafted to play. And then he's not a half back, clearly. So although he played some decent footy there and has got a very good kick, we won't need him there. That's clear. We've got a lot of half backs. We've got Alex Witherden to be that player. We don't need that. We need him to come into the midfield and give us some class around half forward and give us just some pace through the team. So, yeah, it makes sense. I'm mildly excited about it, but a lot of it depends on his ability to go up a level in terms of his professionalism off the field, which is an issue for so many players. If he can do that, when we've got a number 6 draft pick coming to the club with 94 games under his belt, then you start to get enthusiastic about it, don't you?
Yeah, well, 100%. But look, he's coming from Carlton, and to be honest, I'm not sure that the Blues have created a really great environment for players to develop over the years. Like, Sam Walsh is an exception because the guy's an absolute freak and was a number 1 draft pick. But there's not that many players who you can name who they've got the best out of. It's more been players who have left, who have then got better at their next club. So hopefully that's the case for Petrevski-Seton. And, I'm sure Carlton will be heading in the right direction, but that's come too late for Samo. So I guess that's the positive. And you mentioned Brander before, and this is something you're obviously passionate about, but this is not how I saw this playing out. And it's really disappointing the way that it's ended up with Jarrod Brander.
He's a curious player, for starters. So if the issue with Brander, and this may well be the issue, that he just lacks drive and motivation, and that wouldn't shock if that is the case, because he does come across as a laconic player. That's okay. And if you want to move him on because of that, or not keep him on the books because of that, that's understandable. Who are we to judge that? We don't belong in the inner sanctum. But this is a guy who was pick 13 in a super strong draft, who we took ahead of Oscar Allen, Liam Ryan, and Tim Kelly as well, even though he never came to the Eagles initially, but we gave up a lot for him, as we know. And he showed a bit this season. He showed signs of being that first round pick. Like, there are people around the AFL who think that Brander can be a player. So even if you know that those sorts of issues are there, why would you allow the story to get out that you're willing to let him go for nothing? Shouldn't you try and get something back for him? Because you have no bargaining position now. The story's out there. that if they can't do a trade for him, he'll probably go for nothing. So we could lose a number 13 draft pick who was showing the ability to be a damaging player for nothing. I just think it's poor management in that side of things from the Eagles. Now, I saw a couple of people messaging on Twitter saying, well, how can you do that to a person? You got to be honest with them. It's the business of sport. I'm sorry. You can say to Jarrod Brander, listen, mate, we're happy to look at a trade for you. If that doesn't happen, we'll discuss contracts afterwards. And even if you know his papers are stamped, that's the business of sport. It's just the way it goes. And I think the Eagles have played it poorly and just weakened their hand on a first-round draft pick who's still got a lot to offer potentially, enormously. And that's just not something you'd classify the Eagles as doing in the past.
Yeah, I think if I were in the West Coast position, I probably would have tried to play Brander late in the season. So, and hopefully he plays well. And then that gives you something to think about in terms of whether you want to keep him, but it also has other clubs, aware of his ability. And then don't you just put a contract on the table for him, but don't finalise anything until you've spoken to other clubs and to see where they all sit?
Yeah. And
so therefore, you've also got the bargaining position with other clubs to say, well, look, we're still, we're thinking we could potentially keep him, but we're trying to gauge interest. And that way, you don't lose him for nothing. But if you actually decide you don't want to keep him, you don't have to officially rubber stamp the contract. You can, there's ways out of it, but I think you have to hedge your bets a little better. And West Coast didn't do it that well. So, and I just think, how have they let it get to this position where clubs, it appears, weren't interested in parting with anything of note to get him?
Yeah. I mean, when it was announced that, or reported, that the Eagles would let him go if they couldn't satisfy a trade for him, mate, I had messages from mates all over the country, messages from a mate who supports Hawthorn. Do you reckon Mitchell would be interested in him? I reckon he's worth the go. Every other friend I had who supports other clubs, I'd take Brander. I'd give Brander a shot. I'd love to have Brander. Every single one. There's not one that said, no, we're not interested in him. He hasn't got it. Because he's worth the gamble. Like, okay, the motivation might not be there, but that's something that can potentially be worked on. He can be a damaging third tall wingman player. We saw it in patches. He's got good pace, good skills. Yeah, mentally, it might not all be there, but if you're another club, you're taking a punt on that and hoping it can come through, because we've seen enough so far. So surely you'd work with that and try and get something in return, and they still might through the Petrevski-Seton trade or another. But how we allowed that to happen when there is likely to be so much interest on taking the gamble on him, I find that hard to fathom. Yeah, it's really strange, especially given the situation in this trade period is that there are no big players on the move or available, and there's no one's got any money. So Brander, as someone who your club might target, offers, versatility. He's still got lots of upside, and he's not going to cost you much, like in terms of salary. Like, you're not going to have to pay Brander that much to get into your club. And you probably only have to part with, in an ideal world, I was thinking, between, a pick between 30 and 45 would get you Brander, right? But so I just can't understand the way that it's played out. Like, if honestly, I could see Brander in Geelong's round one team next year as playing as a third defender to replace Lockie Henderson. But so I'm intrigued to see how it works out. And it's not like he's not going to be on a list next year. But for West Coast to just openly say he's done if we can't trade him, I just find that's just bizarre. It's quite possible there are issues with his attitude. That seems to be the only problem. Not that he doesn't care about playing footy. I actually have no idea. But we mentioned it before. He can be a bit laconic. Maybe he just doesn't have that drive to be an AFL footballer. Maybe there's a bit of Cale Morton, Jack Watts about him, if you like. Talent, can play in a number of positions, but just doesn't really have the 100% gusto to succeed in a brutal industry. And that might be the case with him. But I just think they should have found a way to bargain it a bit better from their point of view to get something in return. And I don't think they've done that. Maybe they will as part of the Petrevski-Seton trade. If I was Carlton, I'd be trying to work Brander in. And then, a swap of draft picks and Carlton gets a higher draft pick in return with an Eagles swap or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. That's for sure. So having looked through our list, Garby, I sort of just categorised everyone. So at the moment, we've only got 3 ruckmen in Nick Nat, Bailey Williams and Jamison. We've got 10 midfielders, Shuey, Kelly, Yo, Gaff, Sheed, Redden, O'Neill, West, True, Edwards. You've got 8 defenders, general defenders, that would be, which are Shepherd, Duggan, Hearn, Witherden, Cole, Nelson, Foley, Rotham, who's just signed a new contract, which was always going to happen. Key defenders, McGovern, Barras, Harry Edwards. Key forwards, Kennedy, Darling, Oscar Allen and Waterman. And then general forwards, Ryan, Rioli, Cripps, Petrocelli, Jones, Langdon and Winder. So that's our sort of depth chart, so to speak. So I think it's clear that West Coast probably need an insurance sort of older ruckman. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, ideally, which is probably why they tried to offer or keep Vardy on a basement deal, but he didn't want that, which is understandable as well. I don't think it's like, I wouldn't be dismayed if we didn't or worried, because I think Bailey Williams is ready to play. I like him. I think he's got some talent. I'd like to see him get more of a chance this season. Jamison, we haven't seen much of him, but the reports have been promising out of the waffle. And then you can play Oscar Allen or McGovern or maybe even Harry Edwards through there if you need. Obviously, if Nick Nat goes down, we're in a world of trouble. So you'd probably want someone, but if we didn't get him, I don't think it's a massive concern with the other options that we have.
I think the worry would be is that if Nick Nat, let's say, does a hamstring or something, he's out for 4 weeks, and our next 3 games are Melbourne, Adelaide and Collingwood, it's going to be tough to expose Bailey Williams to matchups with those really elite big ruckmen. Yeah. We're going to be so disadvantaged. If we've got a big, older, experienced backup who can at least try and nullify, and can bash and crash into those guys and do a job for us and not expose completely Bailey or Jamison in those situations. I think it's important to have sort of an insurance policy on the list. I haven't gone through every club to look at what the options are, but ultimately there are always guys like that available. The ruck sort of third ruckman merry-go-round is always alive and well. So I think that probably happens. Your Jonathan Giles sort of pick up. So that's probably one that we can get as a free agent, or maybe through a swap of late picks or whatever. So that's not a massive. It's not going to put a big dent in our salary cap or anything like that. But are there any other needs that you think that we have?
I mean, I think I said at the start of last season, maybe the season before, we need someone who can play on a wing. It's clearly an issue for us. I mean, Petrevski-Seton, the issue there is his lung capacity in his tank, but he looms as a player who could play wing. I think
Luke Edwards is going to play. I reckon he's going to be a wingman for us.
Yeah, maybe.
Having watched him live, and I spoke about it on the podcast, seeing his work rate up and down the ground, he looked more than capable of doing that last season. Whether or not they're willing to invest in someone so young remains to be seen. But that would be one option I'd throw out there if you're looking from within.
Yeah.
Are you thinking like a ready-made wingman, or are you just thinking drafting a wingman?
Drafting, you just never know if they're going to be ready. But that's the only need, I think. Key position stocks were there, half forwards were there, half backs were there, inside mids and midfielders, if they're fit, were there. That's always the question mark, though, the injury record. It's still that wing position. Gaffy can play there if everyone's fit. We know that, but he's getting a little bit older. We just need pace on a wing. Luke Edwards, I like that. Has he got the speed, though, yet? Maybe, maybe not. You'd love to see a Jack Petrocelli be able to transform his game and play there. We've discussed that before. I mean, I'd be happier with us trading Jack Petrocelli for Sam Petrevski-Seton rather than Jarrod Brander, personally. But the club obviously knows more in that regard. But Petch is an interesting one. His name's been bandied about a little bit as a trade option. It feels like the club's a bit frustrated with him. He had a good chance this year to establish himself and didn't really do that. that's the only avenue for a spot for me, but be it through trade or through the draft, is someone who can play on a wing and give us some pace. And I think Petrevski-Seton is an option there as well, mate. I don't see why he couldn't. If you start calling him a midfielder forward and he's played some half back, the only issue there is the fitness side of it, because it's a hard position to play in terms of work ethic. But I think he's got all the attributes to play there.
So the wing position is an interesting one for West Coast, because if let's start the conversation by saying that Andrew Gaff is our attacking wingman, and a lot of play goes through his hands. Now, not every club does that. So if Gaff is the attacking wingman, then the other wingman, you're basically saying to him, like, sorry, but you're just going to have to run up and down the wing all day, and there's no guarantee you're going to get the ball. So they're already on, not a hide into nothing, but they're already starting their handicaps with what they can achieve. And within the club, it's going to be valued the doing the gut running up and down and back and all that sort of stuff. But from the outside, it doesn't look that impressive on the stat sheet. Yeah. Also, Gaff doesn't play the modern wing role in the same way that, say, Richmond have done it over the last 5 to 6 years, the Camden McIntosh. And McIntosh isn't an attacking weapon, and the other wingman isn't either, but they both get back and are extremely helpful defensively in filling holes and making sure we're hard to score against. So we don't have that, and it's noticeable the difference that probably would make and it's one we're getting absolutely blown off the park by some of those good sides. So Gaff, it all looks good on paper because he's getting so much of the ball. Is that in the best interests of the game plan going forward, that Gaff gets 35 a game? Then there's someone on the other wing sort of doing that unrewarded stuff. Maybe modernising our wing positions and roles is something that needs to happen. And that makes it interesting going forward as to what they do with it. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't see Gaff flying back into packs.
No. Here are two players that could potentially play that role, and I think it's an important one. And you're right. It's someone who can run up and down the wing, but also fill in a bit more defensively and drop in. Two players have come to mind straight away for that role. Tom Cole and Luke Foley.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon both could play that role.
Well, if they've got the tank, then
I think they both got the tank.
Tom
Cole certainly has got the tank.
Yeah,
I think Luke Foley could play that. Luke Foley's a beautiful kick. So he could drive you forward inside 50. He's strong. He could drop back into space. And I think when he gets the ball, he's happy to look forward and create. He's still very raw and inexperienced. And I'm not saying he's going to work out there, but those are two players that come to mind straight away that can play that role.
So that's interesting, isn't it? So Sydney switched Jordan Dawson to a wing part of the way through last season. And he arguably ends up as an outside All-Australian sort of selection as a halfback / winger. So he's got aerobically, he's got the ability to go up and down. Dawson is, a sort of defender by trade. So he's got the defensive instincts. He's a bit taller, so he can play intercept roles when he does roll back quickly enough. But then when he gets the ball, damaging, and is an option as an outlet kick because you want the ball in his hand. So it's just a very different style of wingman to say an Andrew Gaff. But then you've got Paul Seedsman, who was arguably the best wingman in the competition, and he wasn't, running back into packs and filling space and doing all that dirty work. Like, he was a legitimate attacking option. So it's just interesting to see what we do with the role. And I know it ends up being a conversation we have a lot, but that might be an area that needs looking at, and whether you can recruit for that or whether you look from within, as you've suggested with Cole and Foley. There's a couple of options there.
We've got so many halfbacks. It just seems logical to move one of those players through. And I'm not sure Liam Duggan has the leg speed to play on a wing. I think he's more stepping up into an inside midfield role on ball off halfback. But Cole and Foley seem to do. And the way Witherden finished the season, I think he has to start the campaign. Hearn's going to play on, it seems. You'd want a bigger season from Shepherd, but he can go there. And then Foley comes through. Luke Edwards into the team, who we liked at halfback. There are so many options that we have defensively. I'd like to see one of those players move up and move higher up the ground. So, yeah, we do have the options, but there isn't a nailed on one. And that, to me, is the only deficiency that we have. Do you view us having any other issues positionally?
I mean, writing down the team today, I was just thinking, God, and I just always think it, geez, we look good on paper. I'm writing down these names. I'm like, oh, there's premiership players and, grand final winners and Norm Smiths and Colemans. There's a lot of talent on the list. It's just getting the pieces, fit right into the game plan. And that the bonus, pod, so to speak, that we did with Ryan, one of the points he made, he's, sort of almost urging West Coast fans just to take a deep breath, because the answers that we're looking for next season are already on the list. Like there's not a lot that can be done this off season to immediately improve things next year. The biggest hole on the list for me is a young quality midfielder. So,
of course,
and so whether that's pick 10, like my view would be move heaven and earth to try and slide up the order, but I just don't know how you do it. I don't think West Coast can, unless they're willing to give up 29, 35 and 49, to the Bulldogs who need points, or to someone who desperately needs points. But again, it's going to be hard for West Coast to do that, because right now they've got 10 slots on the list to fill. So it seems like with the fact that we've had turnover in the list, is that they go into the draft to get 5 guys, and then you throw in Sam Petrevski-Seton and then a few rookie selections as well. So it's tough, and West Coast just never have a great opportunity to get up there in the top part of the draft, do they? Like, it doesn't happen very often. If there was a way to potentially get up there, that would be absolute, the best thing I think that we could do. There's also 2 good young Western Australians who are going to go in the top 10, and Fremantle are probably going to get both of them, which is quite frustrating.
Can you not see Erasmus slipping to us at 12? I mean, he's been projected to be around 10 in the draft. Could he slide to us at pick 12 once, the father-son picks come in and we move down a couple?
Yeah, I guess we'd be relying on Fremantle to have another need, because like Fremantle need key position players, don't they? But they need them now. Like getting an 18-year-old key position player for Freo is kind of not that helpful. They need them ASAP. But, they don't grow on trees. So, yeah, I mean, if Fremantle don't take Erasmus with their second top 10 pick, if we assume that they'll get pick 6 for Chera, then yes, he could end up with us. And Erasmus would be perfect. Like, that's exactly what we're looking for, really.
Yeah. But I'd back us to take a quality mid either way with that first pick. And, it doesn't have to be a top 5 pick to slot in and do well. We've seen a number of picks go from 10 to 20 and so on. I spoke to this guy before, Errol Goulden, who I think will be one of the superstars of the comp, when pick 32. You can find them and they can slot in and make a difference. So, yeah, I agree. That is the position. And I really hope that we just focus on a gun classy mid with that first pick. And although we always like to take best available, I don't think this is a season to take a key position player with that first pick. We need a quality mid. It has to be positional need over best available for us with that first pick, I think.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how it's all going to land? Because if West Coast have specifically in mind, okay, we want a mid, and the best 8 midfielders get picked, and then they've got 6 other players who aren't midfielders ranked ahead of the next mid that's available, then what do? Do they trade back? Or do they just take...
You got Harry Edwards and Oscar Allen coming through. I don't see how you make that call.
Well, that's what I mean. Would they slide back? Or when they see only one midfielder left on the table who they rate highly, do they pick up the phone, to whoever's about to use that pick and say, how can we get up here? Like we want it. So, yeah, it's fascinating, and that's this is what they're paid for. And that's why they get the big bucks. Did you notice during the week that Craig Vozzo has gone on leave away from the club?
Yeah, I did see that. Does that worry you at all heading into the draft and trade period?
It does. It worries me because, I mean, we don't know the backstory to this, and I haven't heard any whispers or anything like that. But, I mean, clearly that weakens us. He's a good operator, and he's overseeing everything that goes on with the football department. So it can't be a good thing.
I'd imagine they would have planned for something like this. And Rowan O'Brien's been there a long time as well. In something like that, you back the club. The trade and draft period is too important to not have a plan going into it. So I'm not too worried about it, even though it did take me by surprise.
Yeah, it's did it come out on grand final day? Like it almost slipped by without being noticed. I remember seeing it and I was busy with other things and barely thought about it. Just on that note, we did forecast this earlier in the season, the idea of a changeover of assistant coaches and perhaps some more experienced ones. And not only we got two, so Schofield and Matthew Knight. So I imagine, a couple of new voices and bringing in some new ideas, both from successful clubs, is going to be really good for Adam Simpson.
Yeah, I love this change. I really do. Matthew Knight's in particular, because he's coached at the highest level. He's been involved in a successful club. Maybe he's not cut out for being a head coach again, but the game discards people who have a crack at it and fail first time too often. And we've seen Brett Ratton come in and do reasonably well at St Kilda, getting a second chance, and Michael Voss being given that opportunity, getting a strong voice from the outside into the club. We've seen it work well with Sam Mitchell and others in the past. We don't really know how these things operate, and Jamie Graham has massive raps on him. But from the outside, it did look a little bit stale, our coaching setup. It looked a little bit same. And now you've got two big voices in behind Simo, Knights and Schofields, who come from other clubs with strong views and personalities. And that can only have a positive influence. I will say this, though. When a coach is under pressure, this is often the move, change up the assistant coaches. So we know that if the season goes badly, Simo's going to be under pressure, but that move has happened, which is an interesting one, and often happens a lot when a coach has had a bad year, but he's well established, and you don't want to move that head coach on necessarily. There's
always a distinction between pressure to perform and pressure on your job as a coach. And Simo is under pressure to perform, and it's been, as you said, it's been the move. And we hark back to Damien Hardwick, who was under a lot of pressure at Richmond. They freshen up the assistants after they missed the finals. Club backs him, and then they win 3 of the next 4 flags. So it's proven that a shake-up like this, to get some voices from the outside to freshen up, your head coach and his role, it makes a difference. And Adam Simpson spoke about this again in that radio interview that he did with Jared Healy on Sports Day. He said, often we've developed coaches from within, and we've promoted from, development coach into a midfield or back or, whatever. Jamie Graham's an example of that. But this time they've gone a different way. So Adam Simpson hasn't played a role in developing these coaches. The ideas are coming from the outside, and I think that's crucial. And also, they've done this job and had a lot of responsibility at their clubs. Jarrod Schofield, we know, I think he won 3 or 4 flags as a coach with Subiaco. So you're able to just drop them into their role and let them do their thing and come in with their fresh ideas. So, yeah, I think it's a real positive to see.
Sorry, mate. Sorry for jumping in. But both have worked in midfield and stoppages, which has been our big deficiency. So hopefully they can revamp the way we operate in there.
But how exciting for Schofield and Knights to roll in and see some of the weapons that they've got available to them. And they're coming in from opposition teams who have, spent a lot of time trying to stop them. So they've got these different ideas, and they know, this is what you guys do really well. This is what we try and take advantage of when we play West Coast. And, they can bring all those ideas together. And, we know that they've got some pretty diligent workers and some pretty great, great talent and great football IQs in that midfield. So put it all together, and hopefully we can come up with a new formula that sees us, get back up the ladder. So that's all positive. It's just getting this list sorted out, Garby, and working out what we're going to do with these picks. That's the key.
For sure. Jared Cameron won't be there, though, which is a shame, because we can see he's got talent and it was going this way. But he just seems disillusioned with football and needs to break. That's a shame.
Yeah, it is. I was disappointed, and I think is it Mark Duffield? I think's been pretty hot on this over in the West. Spoke about it on his podcast, and maybe even wrote about it in the newspaper that things had gone sour with Jarrod Cameron, which is such a shame. If he does keep playing footy, I mean, I guess it would make sense for him to go and play for Brisbane if they've got room for him on the list and play with Charlie. You just hope that if he can get back to enjoying his footy. Unfortunately, it's not going to be with us. And, kicked 4 goals in a derby, didn't he, Garby? And at that stage, it felt like he was going to be a regular fixture of the team for, a decade. So it is such a shame. He's obviously had his injury worries as well. So we've got some questions on Twitter. Garby, do you want to get to those?
Before we do, can we just reflect on the BNF first?
Yep.
So, the John Worsfold medal, Nick Natanui won. He's third biggest after all Australian, and the Ness medal, of course. But nice that the John Worsfold medal has come for him, as we all expected. So the top 10, Dom Sheed second, Andrew Gaff third. Did that surprise you at all?
Yeah, the Dom Sheed one surprised me. Maybe we forgot how good he was early in the season. I think that the thing that out of the night, which shocked me, was that he'd been playing with a shoulder injury for a lot of the season and had to get surgery. He was in a sling. So that was interesting. Obviously, the role that he plays is valued. We get frustrated at him for his decision-making or disposal at times. But second surprised me. I would have thought maybe it could have been a Barras or a Redden. What about Gaff third? What did you think of that?
Yeah, that surprised me. She not so much. I think you're right. I think we did forget how good he was early on in the season. Gaff third surprised me. I thought he was underwhelming, but it's clear the medal favors games. Like the more games you play. Jack Redden 4. Yeah, that seems about bang on. He was, to me, not the surprise packet, but the most pleasing performer this season. And we've done our season review, and I think he was up there for our overachiever. So he was good. Jack Darling 5 feels about right. Tim Kelly 6, Jamie Cripps 7. See, I think Barras would have been higher than 8 based on his performances all year, but he missed a few games, so maybe that counted against him. Love Tommy Cole at 9. So Tommy Cole bashers, cop that. Top 10 in the best and fairest. I was actually asked on Melbourne Radio pre-season to give my surprise top 5 finisher for the Eagles in the BNF, and I put forward Tommy Cole. I knew it would be a big effort to get to top 5, but for him to finish 9, I'll take that. Oscar Allen 10, great start, slow finish. We know that. So, yeah, I thought a couple like Barras or Kelly would have finished a bit higher, but they just missed games. And I think the medal favours consistency in terms of getting out there every week, which is probably why Gaff and Sheed finished second and third.
Did you get a couple of pangs watching the Brownlow medal when Oscar Allen got 2-3 vote games in about the first 6, and you were like, oh, that's right. I remember he was taking the AFL by storm in the first 6 weeks of the season, and he looked like he was an absolute world beater before he injured his elbow.
Well, I've done the season review. I'm halfway through it. It'll be out there on the Patreon, Eagles fans, Ness fans, early next week at least. And I described Oscar Allen's season as starting like Nick Riewoldt and finishing like Nick Stone. Who 90s Eagles fans might remember, played 20-odd games for us late 90s when we were battling, and all credit to him, but he just, he filled the role. So he looked like Nick Riewoldt to start, and then it unfortunately faded for him enormously. But we know how good Oscar is, and we know that he'll be back. And I'm excited for all our players to have a proper preseason, but I think he is going to rip it up from the start. I think he is going to absolutely let fly at packs and in games, and just all those top forwards, best young guns in the AFL, just watch him rocket back up that list.
Matthew Lloyd put out his top 7 tall young players in the comp on Trade Radio the other day, and Oscar Allen and Aaron Norton weren't on it. I was like, they might be 1 and 2, and they weren't in his top 7. Anyway, so Candice has got in touch with us on Twitter. Says, hi guys, hope you're going well in the East. What do you think we should do about the ruck stock? So we've talked about this. I think we both agree, Garby, that we'll look at an experienced backup. Candice is always, she's strong on the fact that she doesn't want Oscar in the ruck. And I'd be surprised if we see him in the ruck much next season. In terms of an option for the Eagles to look at, I don't have any names at the top of my list, but again, I think there's always going to be players that are available. She also asked about the Waffle team. I think given the fact that they were getting belted for a lot of the season, I know it did get better as the year went on, I think that's not an ideal environment for players to be learning and developing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's not. It's had mixed results over the last couple of years, so it hasn't really worked out for us ideally. So yeah, I'd tend to agree with that.
So we've got Gentle Ben. How do you think we should build our draft capital? Should we look at having a couple of first rounders, or try a 2017 scattergun approach with many picks in the 20s and 30s?
I mean, it's, as you've said, it's going to be hard to move up the list. I mean, it doesn't look like we're going to be trading anyone of note to move up. Do they do some swaps with picks? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know if scattergun's the right term, but I see where Ben's coming from with that. But I think we can still nab some quality with the picks that we've got, 10, 29, 35. There's still reason to be excited about guys coming in and having a bit of an impact. So I think we're okay as it stands. I don't think it's, if we're going into the draft with these picks, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with how it is. I don't feel like we have to move up. Maybe you disagree.
So here's a suggestion for you, which I was supposed to mention before, but I didn't. If West Coast believe they're going to play finals next season, give me, like, just as a side point, give me a percentage chance of us playing finals next year.
I would say we are a 65% chance.
Okay, so let's say we're likely to end up with a pick between 13 and 18 if we win the flag. Is there a world where we trade our first rounder next year for an extra pick in the teens this year, under the assumption that we're going to sort of go up the ladder a little bit? So we could trade, let's say, our first rounder next year with a team that we see as potentially battling next season for their sort of future second rounder. So we did that with Gold Coast previously.
Yeah.
And then that gives us an extra pick this year.
Yeah, I would back us to do that.
And let's say then we've got pick 10 and pick 15 or 16 or whatever, and then we can put those together, and that's how we get up the order, by getting rid of our first rounder next year and making that into something. That was just something that crossed my mind. If West Coast are really serious and they think we can bounce, the game plan's being revamped, our key players are fit, we're having a full preseason, we're going all in, we've got Kennedy and Hearn, then think, all right, next year we're not going to have a good first round pick, so let's just get rid of it now and try and get into the top 10, because we're not going to have a chance until next year. It's not going to happen. We're not going to slide down the ladder to the bottom with the quality of the players we have on the list. It's going to be, at worst, again, a 9th or 10th or 8th, and maybe we might bounce into 5th or 4th or, whatever. So that's just an option. If they really back themselves to have a good year next year, then you're not going to have a good pick anyway. So trade it away now and upgrade this season while we've got a pick at 10, and maybe we move forward. That's just an idea.
Yeah, I like that.
Albert Shepherd, is there any possibility of trading out a few established players? He says, i.e. Gaff and Sheed. I don't think there's any chance of that happening.
No, we have discussed it before. I wouldn't like to see Sheed traded. I think Sheed, at his age and with our midfield at its best, and that's Yo, Shuey, Kelly in there, that's when he's at his best. He's most damaging, because he floats on the outside a little bit and he can hurt you when he bursts forward, and he can get a lot of the ball. And I think he'll benefit from playing in the guts as much as he had to this year. I think he'll be better for it next season, assuming we have those players fit and ready to go and playing most weeks. Gaffy, I've said before, I think it's something we should look at because of his age and his salary, which is huge. And we've got salary cap issues. And maybe it could work for all parties, but I can't see it happening. He's 31 next year, big preseason, get his body right. And again, he's another one who can benefit from the others coming back and be as brilliant as he's been throughout his career. Like, there is no Gaff bashing here. I'm a massive Gaff lover. I think I had him in our top 5 players of the decade at the start of the year. He's an Eagles great. He'd be around the mark in our all-time team, I think. But it may suit all parties to look at a trade. I can't see it happening, though. So I think both are staying with us. There's no real talk. But then, last season, there was no real talk about the Adam Treloar stuff, Drewy, and it just happened out of nowhere and eventuated.
No, that's true. And, yeah, it's I think it started back with the stuff with Sam Mitchell. It's like once that's happened, it's like you can now never rule anything out. Like things can just come out of nowhere. So, yes, it's possible something could happen, but very unlikely at this stage. So Joe Blogg, he says, who would West Coast be most keen on with their first pick in order out of a miss? It's Matty Johnson and Erasmus. Now, how much do you know about these 3 guys?
Not too much, but from what I've read, Erasmus is a player because he's the true mid, right? So he seems like the one. Is Johnson a mid as well?
He is. So Matthew Johnston in Cal Toomey's Phantom Draft is 13th. Subiaco mid, 190 centimetres, was named in WA's best in the win over South Australia in the under-19s curtain raiser on grand final day. Had 20 disposals, 5 clearances, 9 tackles, and once again proved he can do things other midfielders can't with his size, backing up his impressive first carnival game for WA a month earlier. A rising talent with many pieces to his game. That's Matty Johnson.
Yeah, so Amos to me is just not an option. Like
he'll go to Freo. Yeah, like he's got to go to Freo, right?
Yeah. So hopefully Erasmus or Johnson. I mean, it's interesting with the WA players because they've been more exposed. They've played more footy. The Victorian kids have missed a lot. It's probably going to pump up WA kids a little bit more. But I'd be happy with us taking a Victorian mid that we rate highly and we think can potentially slot in too. Best available, but a midfielder. We just need a classy midfielder. So if it's one of them, superb. And Erasmus seems like the one we'd ideally take. Johnson's got pretty good rep as well.
Yeah, if Johnson was available with our first pick, do you think they would just grab him because he's WA?
Quite possibly, yeah.
Doesn't sound like he is the classy, smooth mover that we're ideally looking for. It sounds like he's an all-rounder, But anyway, I haven't watched him play, so we're limited on what we can offer on that front. So I'm fascinated to see how that all pans out, as we've discussed. Joe's also asked about the backup rucks that are available during the trade period. I mean, we could get the AFL record out, but there's guys out there, that's for sure. We'll be fine.
The other questions I'm looking through, I think we've pretty much answered all of them. Joe's asked about Duggan as a winger. We've discussed that. Shohan Khan's asked about Petrevski-Seton. We've discussed that. He's asked about him on the wing. So, I mean, you're thinking along the same lines, Shohan, which we rate. He's an option there. I like your thinking. And I brought that up before I even saw your question. Steve's asked about the Brander situation, says he's disappointed by Brander being pushed out, but buoyed by Petrevski-Seton potentially coming in. So we're on the same track there. Although he's a bit worried about SPS as well because of Brander's track record and similar kinds of reputations. Get that. Shane Beaton's got a good question, Drewy. Mm-hmm. Are you happy with the re-signings of Redden, Rotham, and Duggan? He says he's pretty stoked. We've signed up all 3. Your take, but I've got some stuff to say about Duggo in particular.
So I'll give you something on Jack Redden, which came across my desk. So he's taken a fairly large pay cut on this contract. And I understand that Redden was okay with that. He understood the circumstances and clearly understands the salary cap situation at West Coast. This is how tight things are in West Coast salary cap, Garby. Jack Redden said when he got his offer, which was, almost halved his salary, he was like, oh, I'm okay with what's happening. Do you mind if we just bump this up another 15 or 20 grand? And West Coast said, no, we can't. So that's how tight things are. And you've got to give Redden a bit of credit here for having the humility to take the pay cut and continue to play at the club. But yeah, things are tight, that's for sure. But it's imperative that we re-sign Redden because he's an influential player, inside the locker room, so to speak, and he obviously had a really good season. And Rotham and Duggan, yep, happy to have them locked away. What were your thoughts on Liam?
Our most underrated absentee this season. Like, I don't think it was discussed enough because we had so many other big players that we focused on. He only played 14 games. I mean, this guy is still being billed as a future captain and someone else who could slot into our midfield, premiership player. He was an enormous absentee for us this season.
And he didn't look right when he came back, did he?
No, he didn't. So I'm stoked we've kept him on. A Victorian boy as well. Another one we've met, there was no talk of going home or wanting to leave or being homesick. Nah, he hasn't seized that opportunity, wants to stay at the club, new deal, seems pumped about it, had surgery, big preseason coming up. And leadership-wise, I think he just looms as such an important player because he's right in that prime. We know we got a lot of old players. He's the one of them in the middle, along with Oscar Allen and a couple others, Liam Ryan, who can really help take us to another level in that prime phase of his career. So I think that's one that has been overlooked, both the absence of him this season and then the re-signing. I think it's a really big one for the club.
Interesting, isn't it? I'm just reading about how Josh Kennedy supposedly still hasn't committed to his 1 year contract. Had we just all assumed that it was locked away? I know, like, I work closely with Tom Morris of Fox Footy, and he has reported probably 2 weeks ago that Hearn and Kennedy were absolutely locked away. But we haven't had an official announcement from the club yet, have we?
No. I get the feeling that Hearn's not too much of a worry. I get the feeling JK's very likely, but maybe still mulling it over and just seeing how he goes. I get, just reading all the articles and you've been around sport long enough that you read between the lines, right? Just reading between the lines, like, looks likely, but just still crossing the T's and dotting the I's before he fully commits. And that's not that he doesn't want to play on, just being sure that he can commit to another preseason, another big campaign, best for him, best for the club. I feel like he's 85% there, but just wants to make sure he's 100% there before committing. That's the feeling I get.
Yeah, I guess we can't underestimate the possibility, or I guess how difficult it is to imagine yourself, getting back to the line on day one of preseason. Yeah. So someone who's gone through so much injury-wise, does he want to put his body through that again? Anyway, we hope that he does play on because he's an absolute champion. So that's all your questions. Thanks for getting involved via Twitter. Garby, have you got anything to leave us with?
That's just about it. So season review coming up on the Patreon, analysis of every player this season rating out of 10. It costs you next to nothing. We love doing this, but it obviously takes a bit of time. So if you can jump on, sign up to the Patreon, use the season review as a catalyst to jump on board if you haven't yet, and contribute a little bit, that'd be great. And I'm sure you'll get some joy and some opinions out of the article. And then you can hit us up on Twitter and slag me all you like for what I've said, and we can address it on the podcast next time. But interesting off-season coming up either way. The trade and draft period will be big for us. Hopefully it works out the way we like, and we can start to get really excited about next season, which I think most fans already are, Drewy.
Garby, great to chat to you. It's been, I think it's the longest between drinks we haven't done a podcast since it started. So it's good to hear your voice again. Hopefully everyone's getting their jab so we can get back to living normally over here in the East, and we can actually come home and see our lovely friends and family and watch West Coast play.
That'd be nice. Get vaccinated, please, if you haven't yet. There's no excuse. Get it done. I know it's a controversial subject, but, I'm pretty adamant about it.
No, we're pro-vax. We're pro-vax on the nest.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy watching the way the club goes about things in this important off-season.
This week at Safeway, shop the 10 for $10 produce sale. With the 10 for $10 produce sale, get items like large avocados, mangoes, green, red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, cucumbers, large lemons, or 16-ounce bags of Signature Farms baby peeled carrots for the member price of just $1 each. Plus, select meats like Signature Farms 80% lean ground beef and Signature Select extra meaty pork loin back ribs are buy one, get one free this week. Hurry in before these deals are gone. Visit Safeway.com for more deals.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.